Hey there, homeschool reading community. Happy Wednesday, happy Valentine's Day, and welcome to this video all about the 3 mistakes that we as parents can make without even knowing it that makes learning to read and teaching our kids how to read harder and take longer. I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I think that sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and in that process, it can actually make the process of teaching our kids how to read and helping them learn longer and harder. And I know that we all want to avoid that. And so today I want to share some of the things that I've noticed after working with hundreds of homeschool families and parents through this process of teaching their kids how to read to be able to help you avoid the mistakes, learn from our mistakes, and make this process faster and easier for your child. So I want to jump right in and just share these 3 ways that we sometimes make learning to read harder for our kids without even knowing it. And if you've been around here for a little while or you have watched some of the other videos, then you might be able to guess the first one. But I think it bears repeating because it's such a common mistake and it's something that can really cause problems for our kids down the road. And that is whenever we teach words instead of sounds to our kids. Whenever we teach words instead of sounds. So when we're teaching our kids to read, we want the foundation and the baseline and the first part of that to be focusing on sounds. So we want to go through the letters of the alphabet and teach our kids the sounds that those letters make. I always recommend starting with the basic consonant sounds, one sound for each consonant, and then the short vowel sounds for the vowels. So those are the sounds that they make when they're in the middle of those short little words, like the a for a, the for e, the I for I, ah for o, and the for u. So those short vowel sounds, you want to start with those first because they're the most common sounds, and then that way each letter just has one sound. That makes it a little bit easier for kids. And once they know those sounds, then you can start to combine those together and teach your child the process of sounding out words. And this is how we want them to be able to learn how to read, because those are the strategies that are going to help them long term with reading and to be able to have that success. When we teach our kids to memorize words, when we memorize words on flashcards or we memorize words in stories, or maybe we use some of those stories that have the repetitive text where kids read the same sentence on each page, but there's one word that's different and they can guess that word based on the picture. You might have seen those, they're very popular. Anyway, when kids read those books or when they memorize flashcards, we're teaching them just that one word. And it might give them a quick win with that one word, and it's actually not that hard at first to get them a little bit of early success. But the problem is that those strategies are not going to transfer over to more complicated books where they don't have a big picture clue to give away any of the tricky words anymore. So when I'm thinking about this, it reminds me a lot of my daughter because she has always been a very picky eater. And so we are going through the process of trying to expose her to some new foods and to help her to really broaden her horizons a little bit and be willing to try new foods and then also to have more foods that she likes and is willing to eat. And so as a part of this process, we're exploring different foods with her and spending time in at dinner, especially just really working on what she eats and what she's willing to eat. And as a part of that, here's what we aren't doing. We are not feeding her an entire plate of desserts. She loves desserts. She loves anything that's sweet, and she would be willing to try new desserts, new different kinds of chocolate, new cupcakes, new whatever, all day. But that doesn't really give us the long-term skills or success that we need with being able to eat. She's not going to develop a taste for new foods if we're just continually feeding her all these desserts. She's probably not going to develop the skills that she needs to be able to try new foods. It's not going to be helpful. It would give us a quick short-term win, right? Because she would try all sorts of different things as long as they were desserts. But the reality is that we need her to learn how to eat a balanced meal. And so that means that we have to do the hard thing now, and we have to introduce vegetables and fruits and all those kinds of things and try to have a more balanced meal. And the same is true with reading. If we go through the process of having our kids memorize words or read those books with the repetitive text and then the picture clues, we are basically feeding them dessert when it comes to reading. So we're giving them a quick early win. They can pick up that book and read it without any problems because they're just going to guess the words from the picture. But the problem is that we're not giving them the skills that they need, building the foundation to really be successful as they continue on in the process of learning to read. And that's what's really important. We want to build a strong foundation and we want to teach good habits at the beginning when the words are easy. And the way that we do that is by starting with the sounds and then combining the sounds together to make words and going through that process rather than just asking our kids to guess. Once the words get more difficult and the picture clues go away, it's going to be critical that our kids know how to attack a new word that they've never seen before when there's not a picture clue. And so that's why it's really important that we start by teaching words or by teaching sounds and not by teaching words. So that's the first mistake, is that I see parents teaching words, teaching sight words, using flashcards, using those repetitive books instead of teaching sounds. The second mistake that I often see is more of like an omission, and that is that a lot of times as parents, we don't focus enough on verbal blending. This is something that has really come up for a lot of us. It's come up after we learned how to read. So for a lot of us that are parents now, when we were kids and we were learning how to read, people didn't understand the importance of verbal blending, and so not a lot of people did it. And it really is a helpful tool in getting our kids who know their letter sounds to be able to combine those together and make words. So especially if your child knows a lot of their letter sounds but then struggles when it comes to putting them together, this tip is for you. So verbal blending is the idea. There's lots of different exercises that you can do. And it's the idea of giving your child something out loud to talk about and think about, and then they answer you back out loud. So there's no written text anywhere in any of this. And you're going to be practicing working from larger parts or words down to smaller. So a really simple task here might be something like, you might say a sentence, Happy Valentine's Day. And then you might ask your child how many words are in that sentence. And your child would have to count Happy Valentine's Day. They would have to count those 3 words. So that's a really simple verbal blending task. And you can continue to make these more and more complex until you're having your child manipulate the sounds within individual words. So a task like that might be take the word cat, say cat. Now instead of k, say p, and see if they can come up with the word pat. So that would be a more complicated, that's sort of at the other end of the spectrum. So you want to be working through some of these activities out loud to help your child develop the skills that they'll need to be able to combine those letters into words and blend them together. Because when we go through this process of learning sounds and then putting them together and reading words, there's a really big jump between being able to read a sound and being able to read a word. And when we practice these verbal blending things, we're giving our kids a bridge to be able to step over that jump more successfully. We're teaching our kids the idea that words are made up of sounds and that sounds are combined together to make words. And this isn't something that kids are born knowing. It's a skill that they have to figure out and develop over time. And so whenever we do these kinds of verbal blending tasks, we're helping our kids to understand that concept, to understand that they can take the sounds that they're starting to know and put them together to make words, or that they can look at a string of sounds and they can read those sounds and come up with a word. So that's really, really important. And it's something that a lot of us weren't explicitly taught. Nobody sat there and explained all of this to us. And so some of us struggle to learn how to read. I think that's one of the reasons why literacy is such a challenge in our culture and why there are so many even adults who are not literate or who struggle with reading. I think it's one of the reasons why is because these skills haven't been taught. And they're really, really important for kids The research is showing that when kids have dyslexia, a lot of times this is the piece that's missing. And so the cool thing is that when we can work on it with our kids and we can spend time practicing it, we can help them build the skills that they need to be able to counteract what's missing. So we're teaching our kids that they need to recognize the sounds that are part of words and that words are combined to make sounds. When our kids are reading a word, when they're taking like the word cat, for example, there's actually a lot of steps involved in that process of being able to read that word. So first, they have to recognize the letters. They have to know that that little squiggle there is a C, and the circle with a stick is an A, and those two lines that are crossed like that are a T. They also have to be able to know all of those letter sounds, and they have to be able to know them pretty automatically. So when they see that first letter, they need to think right away. And when they see the second letter, they need to think ah right away. And when they see the last letter, they need to think t right away. So those need to be really automatic and consistent for them in order to be successful to read that word. Then when they get to it, they have to sound out each of those individual sounds. Then they have to hold all three of those in their working memory at the same time and in the right order. And then they have to be able to blend those together to make a word. So in their brain, they have to translate cat into cat. So there are several different steps to this, and that's one of the reasons why it's tricky. And working on these verbal blending tasks can help our kids to practice some of those pieces so that when they get to this step, they don't get stuck. The final way that we often make reading hard for our kids is just in the way that we approach it. And I love this because this is one that you can fix right now today just by changing the way that you approach reading with your child. I think so often we are freaked out about reading and about teaching reading, and we translate that into the way that we approach our reading lessons and the way that we teach reading to our kids. So we think that it's going to be hard to teach our kids how to read, that they might struggle with reading, that we don't really know what we're doing, that they don't know what they're doing, and because of that, we come at it with a negative approach. Whether we say it or not, we're probably communicating the message, or we may be communicating the message that reading is hard, that this is going to be hard, that these lessons are going to be difficult or boring or long, that it's potential for struggle, that this is going to be a challenge. And when we come to it with that kind of an attitude, we translate that to our kids and they start to think, oh, this is going to be hard. I don't like this. These lessons are too long. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't feel very confident here. This also can cause us to spend a really long time working on reading. We aren't sure what to do, and so we just figure if we don't know what we're doing, we'll just make the lesson longer to make up for it. And that can also cause problems. We talked about that a lot last week. So if you missed the video last week, go and check out the featured section or the guides in the group. There's a replay guide that has all of these Wednesday classes, and you can learn more about that. We also, when we are teaching our kids to read, a lot of times we'll make it really boring, intentionally or unintentionally. Maybe that's how we learned how to read, and so that's what we're going to do too. But we spend a lot of time drilling flashcards and reading those little paragraphs that don't make a lot of sense and just kind of plodding through this thing. And that can be really challenging too for our kids because it is boring. I mean, if it's boring for us, it's probably boring for them, right? And I think this is one of the reasons as well why many of us really believe that we want to wait until our kids are ready to learn how to read. Have you heard that? Or maybe you've thought it, that it's important to wait until your child is ready, until they're old enough, until they're asking you to learn how to read, maybe. There are lots of different ways that it comes across as a homeschool parent. But a lot of us will say that we want to wait until our kids are ready. And there is a place for that. It's important that we make sure that our kids have the building blocks in place to be able to be successful. So we don't want to teach them to read before they know their alphabet, for example. And we don't want to teach them to read before they can pronounce the letter sounds. Those kinds of things are important to have in place first. However, we also sometimes hear this idea of like, I'm going to wait until my child is asking for it, or I'm going to wait until they, they tell me that they're ready. They tell me that they're ready. And I just want to talk about that for a minute. And I want to talk about it in the context of something else that's going on at our house right now, which is that we've introduced some new chores for our kids. And one of them is that my son has the opportunity to learn how to load the dishwasher. So we were practicing that this morning. He was putting away some of the old dishes and loading in some of the new ones. Now, there are two different ways that I could have gone about introducing this idea of loading the dishwasher to my son. Here's the first one. We do chores. Chores are boring and they take a long time and they take away from what you really want to be doing. But as a part of life, you have to learn how to load the dishwasher. So here we go. That's one possible approach. Or I could have just said, hey, look, we're going to learn how to load the dishwasher today. Let me show you what to do. Do you think that you can help me sort all of this silverware? We're going to put the spoons here and the forks here and the knives here. Can you sort them? And then as we're going through, I'm encouraging him, hey, look, you got all the spoons in the right place. Way to go. And then, he's putting away the bowl. Hey, I didn't know you were tall enough to reach all the way up there. Look how tall you are. And just encouraging him as he's going through the process, trying to make it fun, giving him challenges. There's two very different ways to look at it, and his experience of learning how to load the dishwasher is going to be very different depending on which of those I choose. And the same is true for us when we're teaching our kids how to read. And even more importantly, the same is true for us as we're thinking about this idea of our kids telling us they're ready. Just like my son is probably never going to tell me that he's ready and excited to learn how to use the dishwasher, there's a possibility that your child might never tell you that they're ready and excited to learn how to read. Especially if they've had those negative influences in their lives where maybe somebody at school or somebody else in their life has told them or communicated in some way that reading isn't fun. It's possible that they might not ever tell you that they're ready or that they're excited to learn how to read. But that doesn't mean that they're not ready. If they have those developmental steps, if they know their alphabet, if they can pronounce the sounds, if they have had some experience with books, then it's possible that they might be ready even if they're not telling you that they are. And depending on how you approach the process can have a really big impact on those results. So I always recommend that you keep reading lessons really short. I always say 2 to 5 minutes times your child's age is a good ballpark for lessons in general, and for reading lessons you can probably keep it to 10 minutes or less at a time. And when you do, you want to include lots of games and make it really fun. So the goal here is not to ask your 2-year-old to sit at a desk for 30 minutes and go through a big stack of flashcards and a bunch of reading. The goal here is to take your child, even if they're active, and give them fun, hands-on ways and activities to build these steps one on top of another, to take the next logical step, and then the next logical step, and then the next logical step. So reading does not have to be a huge transition. You don't have to make it drastically different than the things that you're already doing to teach your child. So if you're already playing with the magnetic letters on the refrigerator, then one day talk about letter sounds instead of letter names. If you're already doing letter sounds, then one day take the two of the letters that they already know the sounds, squish them together, and see if they can read the word. It doesn't have to be different. It doesn't have to be hard or boring. It doesn't have to take a long time. It can be fun. It can be exciting, just like the kinds of things that you're probably already doing with your child, whether you're officially calling it school or not. All of those learning experiences and opportunities that they're having are exactly what you need to do when you teach your child to read. And it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be different. So I hope that this was helpful in thinking about those 3 biggest mistakes that we make. The first one that we talked about was this idea of teaching words, not sounds. And we talked about how important it is to build a basis for your child of understanding the letter sounds and then putting them together, and to teach them that reading is a process of combining sounds together to make words, and not that reading is a process of memorizing whole words and then guessing. We talked about how that process of blending is going to set your child up for success in the future as the books get harder. We also talked about how important it is to focus on verbal blending and about how ignoring that is a big mistake. We talked about how you can do those kinds of activities with your child where you're just giving them questions and having them answer, moving from simple to more complex. And we talked about how that will help your child to be able to understand that words are made up of sounds and that sounds are combined together to make words, which is a really key step in blending words that a lot of times gets missed. And then we also talked about how sometimes we make the process of learning to read hard for our kids just because of our attitude and the way that we're approaching it. And we talked about how using a positive approach, making it fun, using lots of games can really help our kids to be able to see this as just the next logical step in their learning and not something that we have to wait years and years for our child to tell us that they're ready because we know how hard and long and boring it's going to be. So hopefully this was helpful and gave you some things to think about as you're teaching your child to read. Let me know in the comments which one of these was most interesting to you or what you thought about them. And of course, if you have any questions about teaching your child to read, feel free to drop those in the comments as well. I will be back throughout the week to keep an eye on those and to answer questions as they come up. So I hope that you have a wonderful Valentine's Day and a great rest of your week. Thanks, everybody. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this video, which was recorded live in the Homeschool Reading Community Group. This is a free Facebook group where I share tips and advice about homeschooling and teaching reading. You'll also find community with other homeschool moms like you, plus freebies, giveaways, parties, and more. I would love for you to join us over at the Homeschool Reading Community. Make sure that you check out the link in the description of this video for all the details.